Gary, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me back. So happy to be here and so happy to be talking about things that hopefully will, raise a little bit of curiosity out there with the audience and say, well, maybe I should look into a few of those things because that's kind of what I like to do.
Yes. Gary's books breed much curiosity amongst potential readers and readers. We have lots of questions after we encounter your material. Today, we're talking about something a little bit different. You and I have done interviews several times
Yeah.
over the past decade, and we've talked about things related to the Genesis 6 conspiracy parts 1 and 2. And you've gone off in a new direction with fiction. And as we were talking about before the interview, some of your audience kind of freaked out. Was like, Gary, have you lost your mind? Did you get taken out and they've cloned you and you're writing fiction now? I'd love to hear a little bit just about that decision
Yeah.
to step into fiction. Like I was very surprised when you started pushing for pre-orders. As like, this breaks my paradigm of everything I know about Gary and his work. So why the decision to go towards fiction? I know it was intentional.
Yeah. And, my publisher has wanted me to partner with another author, you know, throughout the last decade to try and take my research and make it into fiction novel, which would get that type of information out to a larger kind of audience. And typically, I haven't found an author that I felt I was comfortable with or that we're on the same page. And I think that type of collaboration requires, patience on both sides and a clear sort of clear cut model of what you want to do. So, Bill, who is the co author on this book, he is the publisher. And so that helps a lot because of the speed of the process and everything else. And he's a fiction writer. So he thought, well, why don't I be your partner and we can get on the same page on the goals that we want because we're familiar with each other. And we'll try and get your research a little bit more mainstream, so to speak, into a larger audience versus how I would phrase it instead of mainstream. So, and it's not that I don't have other books I want to write, and I still have another one that I want to write, and this one's going to probably be a series of books. So I'm going to stay quite busy. And it's not that my other books aren't selling. Like book one, it sells more books every year than it did the first year, and it's been out 10 years. Book two obviously tracked up higher to the level of first year sales than when I was a complete sort of unknown, but it continues to do very, very well. And in both and with the audible versions out there now in all the categories that they're selling in, they're still doing very well. So it was, yeah, I get it. Maybe we want to reach more people. They don't have to believe everything I research or everything I say, but just to get the idea of how prehistory is connected to end time prophecy. How do we sort of make that happen? So we decided on a combination of creating, obviously, good characters and evil characters. And with the so called evil characters, not so called, but they are evil characters, I give them a resume and a genealogy. And so these people are part of secret societies, they're part of the oligarchy, or they're also part of um, religious organizations, polytheists for the most part, but some of them are moles within Christianity as well. And we're going to provide locations as to where they come from and have scenes at locations that are all important. All the names of the characters have special names and are Google worthy. All of the locations are Google worthy. So we're layering it with a lot of texture that's in there that if people want to go deeper, but we're
Right.
creating an intriguing story. And then we're matching that up with my eschatology as to how the end time plays out. And we're trying to do this with a combination of one of Bill's requests is he would like to see, and I was on full agreement, this needs to be explored, how AI is going to influence the end time. And
Right.
so the book, The Opprimo Conspiracy, subtitled AI's Covenant with Babylon, is very, very important because the polytheist mystical religion that is coming is a knowledge-based religion, just as
Right.
Gnosticism comes from Greek gnosis for knowledge. AI is out of that same ancient sort of partnership of religion and knowledge that comes out of prehistory and early post-Diluvian history. So we wanted to make all of that sort of come to play and started at a point where we can look at where we are today and then start to look at how we move into the last 7 years. And we project that further down the road, obviously, but we have to sort of get there, set the table. And in book one, we get to the end of the third seal opening and we preview the fourth seal. And we're previewing the start of the last 7 years from there, which would go into book two. So what we're doing is creating a situation that people can relate to from where we are today, and then try and match all of these different things that are going on with the various aspects of eschatology.
And I think you've alluded to some of this, but and this is always hard with fiction interviews because like, do we give away a lot of the story? Do I hold back? It's just since you're a nonfiction author, I'm expecting you're going to share more. So many fiction
Yeah,
authors like
yeah,
hold it close to the chest. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my characters. Now you go buy the book
yeah.
to figure out the rest. But in terms of like the thread at the center story, like if you had to summarize, like this is the core problem, threat, the thing, the thing we're looking at going after. Have you defined that for us already? What you already shared, or is there more you haven't unpacked yet?
Oh, there's a lot more that I haven't unpacked yet, and I'm not as much concerned about releasing too much information about it because people who know the Bible know how Revelation ends. So I don't have
Yeah,
to worry about the ending, right? So
you just gave away the story already. Thanks a lot, Gary.
but it's the how that really sort of intrigues people and captivates and frustrates people, and for a lot of people who would like to get into it, they don't have, because it's such a large and crazy sort of concept of the things that are going to go on. They don't have a concept of how do we get there. And
Right,
how does that even sort of come about? They may recognize what's going on in the world doesn't seem quite right today, but it's a long ways from having a universal religion. It's a long
right.
ways from having, 10 kings reigning over the seventh beast empire. It's a long ways from the people of Judah doing sacrifices on a wing of the temple in the Holy of Holies. Those are things that are huge obstacles. So we have to sort of wrap that in away from where we are and where it's going to get to. And so I think what we do that's rather interesting, and I won't get into the details on this as to how we do it, but one of the things that is, if you're going to write an end time story and you're going to get into the last 7 years, you have all of these throne settings
Right.
going on in Revelation. How does that message get to the earth? Or does it get to the earth? Well, I would answer this part of it. Yes, in my book, it gets to the earth and we create a way to do it, but we don't want to trample on, uh, like Jesus opening the seals. And then, okay, so that information comes out. That's what we deal with. And we create sort of that intermediary who starts to communicate that on the earth. And that's one of the main characters in the book.
And I'm curious in terms of like core characters, like who are some of the folks we're going to meet? And related to
Yeah.
that, do you write yourself into one of the characters or yourself into? I feel like every author can almost not resist making themselves a character, even if it's
Yeah.
some other name. So characters, and are you in there somewhere?
Yeah, there's parts of me in Sam Andros' character, who's one of the main characters, and we picked Samuel for a name because it's obviously Samuel's a prophet, and it means strong, mighty God, or God is strong or mighty, however you want to do that. And he's a biblical archaeologist and a bit of a contrarian. He almost has which isn't really part of me, he has this sort of aura of a Indiana Jones type of character. Um, so it's kind of a mix in there, but there's not one that's totally sort of based on me. But we do have an interesting fellow that we introduced that's named Elias Velak, and Elias is obviously the Greek name for Elijah. And he's the character that is the one that's sponsoring the Opprimo Wall, which means to crush, to oppress, just as the Seventh Empire does. But this is in relationship to the Opprimo Wall, which is the AI technology and more like angelic technology or demonic technology. And we use the word Velak because, again, that's Google worthy. It is, it comes out of the Slavic aspect. And in terms of the culture, meaning pale skinned and a giant and a clan with red hair, specifically. And so we give him a genealogy that goes back to the Amalekite, the Amalekim, as I like to call them, with the giants, and the oath to destroy Israel from the face of the earth. So this transgenerational blood oath. And he is going to be the character that's going to be the false prophet as he evolves into the story plan. So, and he's part of what we call a group that we call a transgenerational Black Root Circle Secret Society. Wanted to create one like that. And that's kind of a playoff on the wheat and the tares, right? And so if people remember in the Bible, Elijah brings fire down from the sky as a prophet. And that's why Elias, because false prophet also does the same thing. And so he'll make the way for the Antichrist character, who doesn't play a large role in book one, but we introduce him. And his name is Darian Mirza, which again is, if you start Googling Mirza and Amir, as you take the last part out, or for the first part, and Za for it being, a prince of a bloodline, you start to get into some interesting characters. So the first character with with Elias Velak is we give him only part of the bloodline because we're going to give him a grafted in bloodline in book 2 that takes him back to the tribe of Dan. And with Darian Mirza, we're going to take him quickly. We're going to give him another pedigree in book 2 or book 3, depending on how far we get down there. But he's got a pedigree that's going to go back to Darius and Nebuchadnezzar. So these are the types of things that we're working with in terms of the characters. So yeah, it's as much trying to get people to understand where these people come from, what they're trying to do, and how that works in terms of how does that affect Christianity and what Christianity's working in it. So one of the things that we wanted to get in, particularly into book one, was that there's a situation that has to arise, in my opinion and understanding, with the Catholic Church and with the rise of Babylon. And we're going to move Babylon to the Seven Hills, which we're replacing with the Septimontium, the Seven Hills of Rome, and that's centered at Palatine Hill, where they build their Babylon temple. But this is working from within the Catholic Church. But what we do is we present a split between two factions of Catholicism, one that's going to follow into the Babylon religion and one that's going to be more conservative and form a partnership with Protestants to make a stand against everything that's going on. So we're trying to deal with all of those things to set the geopolitical table. And how do you get to 10 kings? How do you get to 10 groups of empires? And so we're dealing with all of those sort of aspects, but also trying to get into the seal opening. And the reason why we stop at the first 3 seals, because you can make a really good argument that the seals are open just before the start of the last 7 years, right at the 7 years, or just after the beginning of the 7 years. It's just the speed of how fast those things might come out when you do that. So we're essentially we have established, for the sake of the book and the chronology that we're trying to do, is to start the 7 years after the first 4 seals.
Man, I got so enamored with what you were sharing. I almost got lost in my outline. I think, for characters, and you don't have to go at length or lengthy on this. But I've worked with a lot of fiction writers through the years and interviewed quite a few, and it always seems like, you have a plan, you kind of map out who your characters are. And then as
Yeah.
you're working on the book, the characters take on a life of their own. And so, I mean, you've transitioned from nonfiction to fiction writing with this project. Did you see characters doing things you weren't expecting as the story went on?
Not really. We charted a pretty tight course because we wanted the characters to be essentially the narrative, right? That and they become the visible part of the narrative. So we didn't want to have too many zigzags on the road, and that we would have to somehow rewrite something down the road to compensate. So no, we haven't had that yet, and but we're centering in book one around. Even though we introduced a lot of characters, there's like a half a dozen characters that we're focusing on, and they're still all sort of working almost semi-independently, and as things are starting to come together. So we're going to have to pay a lot more attention to some of the other characters in terms of their personalities and stuff as we move forward. So, and just to give you an idea, like we have a scene of a meeting of people that Elias is involved on, and I won't go through all of it, but it's just kind of juicy, just kind of it's kind of cool. So I thought it was, anyways. So Lydia Hallberg is at this meeting, and she's an emissary of the Tula or Thule Covenant, a Nordic genesis, bold, brilliant, and indifferent to souls. Her AI network, dissect and try and bring about polytheist outcomes. And so we have a Dr. Alaric von Bassenheim. He's a German descendant of an elite SS officer who saw the occult research on Himmler's NRB division, which was seeking all the Grail Hallows and things. And he's got a bloodline of the Teutonic and Templar Sihoned into him. And he is a architect of mythic propaganda, so ancient mythology, and an expert in that sort of field. And he another one would be Reginald March, and he's part of the Vatican Shadows group. So he's a mole within the church, and is a director of the he's a director of the Rosicrucian Shadow Forum, and a philanthropist and a misinformation technician by night. So and it goes on. I mean, I've got like half a dozen other characters that are there. We've got 10 of them, and so we're going to work hard as we move through into book two to bring them into play, but not to have them overshadow it too much, because it's just not a book about the evil ones. It's a book about the saints as well and their
Right.
story as they go through this. And Becky's a really interesting one as the main character. We actually take her back to a Basque genealogy.
And I remembered what I was going to ask earlier. Um, how would you describe AI in the book? Is it a character? Is it technology that gets co-opted or corrupted? Like I think the temptation would be to always make AI a character in this day and age where we're at. Like, does it fall somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, it's going to be somewhere in the middle, and it's still a technology that's in control. We've introduced the idea of demons that Elias is working with, and a couple other characters are. But this AI is going to develop into a personality on its own and start to do things, obviously, on its own. But to give a foreshadow of what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and introduce it as a technological, like a Tarian or a Teraphim. And it's a precursor for the beast technology that he takes over or adds to at the midpoint of the last 7 years. So it's a beast like AI system, but not quite at the same sort of level. And so, what I mean by this oikatarian, a dwelling place for demons. So you have a choice to go. It's either 100% artificially created entity somehow, some way. I can't sort of resonate biblically, because only God creates a spirit. Counterfeit spirits that come from the fallen angels are, reproduced in a certain way. But this is completely different. It's not organic, it's technology. So going with the idea of a teraphim, which is a talking idol in the Bible, and it's rooted in the source word Rapha for heel and demon spirit and giant. And this would be the same talking idol that was around in the time of Jacob and Laban and Rachel. And the family idol as it's translated there, but it's teraphim. So teraphim, you'll actually show up. I double stated there, but you'll actually see show up in the Bible as a talking idol in its context there, but it's not always translated as a talking idol. And so this is some sort of technology that we're kind of basing it on. And also the concept was, in the book of Daniel, you have this hand that writes on the wall. And so the wall aspect connected to the beast empires that are going to rule with Babylon, and this mysterious supernatural force that's doing the writing was kind of the basis for a counterfeit wall. And with the AI technology, and then we're layering in as we go, as I say, what those entities are going to be.
And we'll jump back to fiction writing for here a minute or two. Um, as a guy who's written many pages in nonfiction, like, did you see anything that the fiction allowed you to do that you just couldn't do in your Genesis 6 conspiracy books? Was there a newfound freedom anywhere in this project?
There was, because now you can create characters that fit these connections. You can display locations like Petra, or a place in where one of the seals are going to be opened in Iran or in Elam, and talk about its ancient meaning as Olam, ancient sort of the East, and the Olamim as a giant people, and a special location of where some of the technology was used in polytheism and things like that. So you can start to put that into play. We can talk about Petra in ways that, again, are built on who lived there with the Amalekim giants and this important sort of location. So we're able to do some of those things, and we're going to move into some of the some other ancient sites into that are more kind of around the world into book 2. So that part was kind of nice, as to how do you get some of this ancient knowledge that we want people aware of, that this polytheist religion is building their religion on, that they're going to reintroduce, and not make it too overt. Let's just put it into the background. Again, let's make it Google worthy, because people will want to know, what maybe why we're at any of those locations. There's a reason for all of it, and then we're going to up the sort of gravity of that as we go into the sequels.
And back to the word opprimo. Hopefully, I'm saying that right. I'll
Yep.
butcher it a billion times in the interview, I'm sure. Like, what's the broader meaning? Like, is it? I mean, to crush, but like, is
Yeah.
there a broad context for that word?
Yeah, this is a system that is going to support the religious and the geopolitical system that's going to oppress people. So you have different levels of tribulation that comes. You have tribulation before the last 7 years, which Babylon is also part of. Then you have the tribulation of saints that's recorded in Revelation 7. And then you have this great tribulation of the world not seen since creation, that starts after the abomination and the crowning of Antichrist as the leader of the world. So Babylon has blood on herself, as Revelation 18 talks about, for persecuting the saints, not just in the end time, but throughout the history, as the daughters of Babylon, religions of the beast empires. And so, yes, we want to have that as a backdrop to the understanding that it's the AI that's going to permit them to do a lot of this, and do the selecting and tracking of people and the control of people. The Seventh Empire is based out of the Sixth Empire, which is the Roman Empire, which was oppressive, which crushed people. And this other empire in the end time is going to be a little bit different, because of the iron and the clay aspect of it and its worldwide um, projection of its power, but it's going to oppress even more because it's at a higher level of oppression than what happened with this oppressive iron empire that's recorded in Daniel 2.
And kind of, I guess, maybe pulling on the character thread a little more. And you don't give away too much in the story if I'm asking too much. But like, because again, I want the AI to be a character if I wrote this novel. But
Yeah,
like, is Opprimo like, is it a machine? Is it a system? Is it a spiritual principality? Is it a sim? Like, is it like kind of like that earlier question? Is it kind of a bunch of things? Because
it's a
I feel
bunch
like
of things.
you could view it through so many lenses.
It's a bunch of things. It tries to make its own position in the hierarchy, but it's not technically in the hierarchy of invisible ones or visible ones. And when I talk about visible ones, that's those who run this world today as the spurious offspring of the fallen angels. The invisible ones, even though they can make themselves visible when they choose, I still classify them as the invisible ones. And right below that would be the disembodied spirits of the giants that we would understand as demons in our understanding today. So there's several hierarchies in there.
And in terms of the Opprimo Wall, like,
Yeah,
is it surveillance? Is it a data vault? Is it a digital temple?
yeah.
Am I massacring this and getting it all wrong? Like what when you say that wall, like what does that mean in the story?
It's a massive wall of technology, and where we locate it in the beginning, because they haven't quite finished and built the temple where Babylon would be at, in Strasbourg underneath an old Catholic church. Um, and so that's where, when I talked about these people meeting, that's where they're meeting, is in this underground vault underneath a specific church in Strasbourg. And so it is physical and it is fairly large, and um, it is sort of an image that we want people to have, if I can speak of it in that sort of way, because eventually, as the image of the beast, this system becomes an idol or an image. Um, but what we're wanting to people to sort of understand about this is that this is something that is going to be a threat to humanity as a competitor. So we're going to talk about some of that competitor aspect that's going to be driving it, because as we will learn more of about AI, is it demands huge amounts of water to cool it,
Right.
unless there's going to be something with a change in technology that comes along, and huge amounts of electricity that we can't currently supply. So in 2023, 4% of the grid of the US went to data centers and development of AI, of everything the US could produce. 2026, it's 6%. Going to be at least 7% by the end of the year and growing. By 2030, it's going to be over 20%. By 2035, it's going to be 50%. And the whole world is developing AI.
Right.
And the same sort of pressures become. So now we're going to become a competitor for that electricity because we can't produce enough of it even today.
Right.
And so it's going to begin to look at humanity as a competitor to its own survivability and needs. And the drive to continue to develop it even more is going to be there, because if you fall behind on this AI weaponry race, and it's going to be controlling the militaries as we project it downstream, then you have to continually to make it stronger and better. And
Right.
it does become a godlike at a certain point in time, but we're not, unless we change our mind, we're not taking it to a point of being a sentient being, but still an operating system for invisible spirits.
Well, and that's, outside of the novel, that's just a sobering thought of being in a race for resources with AI data centers,
Yeah.
electricity, water. You get to a place where the question could be, who can afford to buy the resources? Will people get priced out?
Yeah, it's like a contrived catastrophe. They're trying to addict everybody and switch everything over to electric. vehicles, electric appliances, electric everything, all the while knowing we don't have any infrastructure or an ability to supply the requirements going forward. So you're creating that tragedy that has to
Right.
play out however you want to play that out in your own mind. How we're going to play it out is it's going to look at humanity as
Right.
being too many and a competitor. So it's going to be very active in the catastrophes of Revelation. At least, you know, and I won't say completely because I put the wrathfuls in a separate category than the trumpets and the seals.
And let's pull on the covenant language. Give us a little bit of background. Like what's the covenant that AI is making with Babylon? Is it to partner together? Like what does that mean? How does that come together? Because I've never tried to apply covenant language to AI.
Yeah. So, well, when you look at the word covenant, we get a word for covenant that's used in Daniel 9:27, and that starts the last 7 years. And we have a covenant that's associated with Israel and Judah, and a new covenant for Christians. So, if we're talking about an AI covenant with Babylon, this is obviously a polytheist religious covenant and with an end goal. Just as the Holy Covenant was brought about and all the covenants building up was a pathway forward to bring about the Word of God and to bring about the resurrection so we can be raised up to be like angels and to inherit eternity, even though we have human fathers. And so that implies the introduction of not only Jesus when he came in the time of the crucifixion, obviously, in his resurrection, but he's coming again. And what he's going to be doing in coming again, well, polytheist religions have their own antichrist figures, which is why we're told there's going to be many antichrists by Jesus and also in the epistles of John. So we're going to have multiple antichrists as we go and sort of
Right.
the antichrist. But the covenant with Babylon is to make the way for antichrist to come to power, just as Elijah makes the way um, for Jesus to come in the end time, and John did in the time of Jesus. So the covenant that gets signed basically is the subtext to what that covenant is all about. That's negotiated by somebody who's not king of the world yet, and he's going
Right.
to has to rise through the first 3.5 years as he does in the book of Daniel and Daniel 7, and particularly where he rises amongst the horns, and then we're told that he's crowned at the middle of the last 7 years and ends the sacrifices on the temple. So there's the process of that transition and rising, which the first few books are going to be dealing with.
And since we've defined some of the other key characters in terms, talk to us a little bit about how you're using Babylon, because I think a lot. You say the word Babylon, and people have a bunch of different ideas.
Yeah,
Like,
they do.
is it a city,
Yeah.
a religious or economic system? Like, what is Babylon, and how you're applying it in the book?
So Babylon and the beast are two terms you need to understand in the full context in terms of how I approach it. And I approach it from the details I get out of the Bible. So when I look at Babylon, we know it's a city because it's said to be a city 9 times in the book of Revelation. Okay, so in part it's got to be a city. So we're going to pick a city, and we've chosen Rome that has 7 hills that what I call the Septimontium, which is the 7 hills of Romulus Remus, right? Vaticanus Hill was originally outside the city walls of Rome, but was a branch of Palatine Hill. And it was called Vaticanus Hill, but it was part of the Sibylline prophecies. Um, so just some history in terms of that, but it's a city. So we picked a city, and that's my city that I wanted to pick for the book and what I've done in my research. And it's also a religious system, and she sits on many water. And it's a mystical religion as it's described with the allegories of prostitution and adultery. Those are definitions for worshiping other gods that come from the Old Testament. And mystery is mysterion in Greek. This is the word for an initiatory polytheist organization. All of the polytheist religions are mystery religions. So, and it's going to be this daughter of Babylon as we see it come down through the beast systems, but the mother religion comes back. So the mother religion of Babylon, rooted in Babel, but this is the religion that was based in before the flood. That's Zoroastrianism, as we know it secular wise. I like to call it Enochian mysticism of son of Cain versus Jared there. So for the distinction for people, and the one that crosses the flood and was the religion of the giant. So it's this ancient mystery religion that was part of the hierarchy as the daughters of religions of those beast empires. Okay. So it's a religion. Number two, it's a geopolitical organization because it controls the 10 kings. So much so, they grow jealous of how rich he is for taking a tribute on pretty much every transaction, as I'm going to play it out in the book. And so they're going to partner with Antichrist at the midpoint to destroy Babylon. Okay, so it's a geopolitical organization, and the imagery is she rides the beast of empire with rain, rides on them, and as I explained, was always part of the organizational structure of these Gentile polytheist empires, both before and after the flood. And it's also an economic organization because it controls all of the trade, as we learn in Revelation 18, and grows rich. So we have to understand Babylon in those four components. And you would understand the beast system similarly. So it's going to be a political organization because he rules the world. He's going to be located at a city where he is going to rule from, which is Jerusalem, where he crowns himself king in the temple with the abomination. It's going to be an economic system because it controls everything that is bought and sold. So it's very much as the occultists would believe, and this is sort of dipping into how they describe things. We're in a Babylon system now that's going to be replaced by a Leviathan system. And if that sounds familiar, a Leviathan biblically is a hydra, multiple heads. Just as in Revelation 13, the beast of empires comes up out of the sea as a hydra.
And in your story, do we have a false prophet that comes on the scene anywhere in book one?
Yes, that's Elias Velak. And he is, and we're going to provide him, as I mentioned earlier, a scion additional bloodline that takes them back to the tribe of Dan.
And I guess big picture, reader's journey with the book. I mean, I know you're setting this up for book two. Like, I guess first, like, do you have a certain number of books you're envisioning? Is this going to be a trilogy? Like,
Um,
what's in your mind right now?
as many as it takes. Bill wanted to do from the beginning in one book, and I said, "Well, I thought you didn't want a book the size that I tend to write." He said, "No." I said, "Well, it'll be bigger than that if you try and do it in one."
Yeah.
So he said, "Okay, well, maybe we can do it in two books." I said, "We're not even going to be able to get through the seals by the end of book one, and we're going to have to squeeze it down." So I'm envisioning somewhere between 3 to 5, depending on how fast we can bring and make sense of all the different types of events that have to sort of come into play, because there's just so much detail of different types of events. And then you have to explain and the consequences and through the characters and stuff, as you know. So all of that takes time and space. So I would like to get into to the end of the trumpet in book two, but I don't think we're going to get there as we're outlining it right now. Well, we definitely, I think, because I don't want to exacerbate the audience, is I think we got to get beyond the end of the seals and into the trumpet. So maybe we'll get to the point. If I will probably try and focus, at least let's get to the start of the opening of the pit prison and the three woes.
And in terms of back to my reader's journey, like reader impact, talk to us about like how you want to impact them spiritually over the course of this first book, and also in terms of intrigue and interest. I feel like you're trying to bring the reader kind of into your world and the stuff that fascinates you, and hope maybe that they're going to pick up your Genesis 6 conspiracy books and other kind of books in these conversations, because you need something to lead you down that rabbit hole to go, oh wow, this is crazy fascinating. But not everybody gets there. So will this be kind of a feeder into your broader world, if you will?
Absolutely, because I think if you want to learn in detail on all of these organizations and the things that are based on and the allegories that are used in end time prophecy, you're going to have to get into the Old Testament and that type of information. So, yeah, we're hoping that going to people say, "Hey, I want to learn more about this," because uh, there's there's something that's going on today,
Right.
and it's going to get so crazy. The only way you can prepare and imagine what's going to come, and you still won't be able to imagine it all, is to understand what happened in prehistory. And there's, a reference to the days of Noah, but I would also say what's scarier than the days of Noah in the Olivet discourse would be Ecclesiastes 1 that says, "Nothing new is under the sun. What
Right.
was will be again, and the understanding of this wisdom only brings grief and sorrow." And then you match that up with passages like in the book of Luke in the Olivet Discourse, where men's hearts are going to fail as of what they're seeing going on. We can't imagine that in the world we live in today. And so we're trying to give sort of a vehicle for people to start imagining what that might be. And if that's the case, then how do I prepare spiritually to take on that challenge? And what is the armor of God I'm going to need in the age of alien disclosure and different types of beings and all sorts of things going on, and a technology that we can't even imagine how it's going to fully be implemented, except for the stingy sort of details we get out of prophecy, which is enough to scare you enough. But to think about that application, to have absolute control over humans and to determine whether they live or die and buy or sell is absolutely, in a world that we're not today, but we're starting to get a bit of a glimpse. So, yeah, I'm trying to get people spiritually in that mode for I need to learn more and I
Right.
need to learn how to put on the armor of God. And we may not be able to rely on our churches to adequately lead us through this based on their reluctance to deal with prehistory and prophecy.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of the things you discuss in your books, these are things that didn't have a seminary class. Unfortunately, all the hard stuff your parishioners ask you as a pastor, it's like deer in the headlights. No, no, we did discuss this. Yeah, and it's funny, I think back to when you and I first met, which at this point is 10, 11 years ago.
Yeah.
I think of my other friends and people that I have, started out working in more of what we call like fringe spaces, or I was like, as Michael Heiser put it, like Christian Middle Earth. Some of the lectures I went to at conferences and some of the books. I mean, like you read some of the stuff, and 10 years, I'm like, man, these people sound like they're kind of crazy, or they're like way so far out in the edge. And 10, 11 years later, it doesn't seem so crazy anymore.
Yeah.
Like these are our headlines. Like this is the
Yeah.
stuff everybody's
So,
talking about.
yeah.
So
And,
yeah,
and,
you were kind of ahead of the game, Gary, in these conversations.
yes. And when I introduced those subjects, a lot of people would say, you look normal, but you say the craziest things. And I did a
Mm.
couple of shows with people that um, I worked with early on, and they wanted to talk to me about the alien disclosure. And they're going, "You talked about these four groups that they're introducing 10 years ago." So I did full shows just on how we might understand them biblically and through prehistory to understand that these are interdimensional beings versus intergalactic. And it's part of giving us part of the information, but not all of the information, and to continually sort of deceive us. So, yeah, it's been an interesting journey for sure. And after I wrote book one, I thought, well, I'm one and done, and in a year I'll be gone. And it's like 11 years later, and my books sell more, and I'm busier than ever, and have more projects to do. So it's interesting times.
Well, and I remember something I was going to mention earlier, just when we started the conversation. Like one of the things, like as a publisher and an author myself who kind of works in these spaces, one of the things I've always appreciated about you, Gary, is you hustle, you get out there, you do interviews. Like you figured out the secret to keep books selling is you have to keep talking about them. I feel like I
Yeah.
see you doing more interviews now than I did 5 or 6 years ago. Do you feel like that momentum has shifted for you?
Oh, yeah, and it's managing how many interviews. I mean, I can't physically sort of be there in the moment if I'm doing more than, 7 a week. So, but
Right.
the last 3 years, I've averaged over 7 a week, and I'm cutting it back to about 4 a week just because, I wanna make sure it's not becoming sort of mundane, and I have other projects that, that I would like to do. So I learned, I was quite surprised. I went to, when my book was launched, I went to a conference, Christian book publishing conference, to do signings and sort of launch my book. And I sat in on a course that just sort of was an hour lecture on an author, and it just stunned me with some of the information that they provided. That if you think your publisher is going to spend millions of dollars to promote you, that's not going to happen. And they only tend to do that on people who have platforms and are very,
Right.
very well known. And at that time, I think they said, they wanted, even if them, if they wanted to sell 1 million of those books, they would have to do $1 per book of investment for marketing, which would be $1 million. So think about how much they're going to spend on somebody that's unknown. But that's not what. So I knew I would have to do things myself. But what really caught my eye was, at that time, the number that they quoted was every 3 months there's 25,000 new books coming onto the market every 3 months. So if you're going to create shelf space or create any sort of attention or keep that book in front of the people, you have to find ways to do that yourself.
Right.
So even though it takes a lot of work to write a book, and it does, and at the beginning, it's really hard to get a book published, and it is. But after that is when the real work, I think, begins, if you want to keep it out there and relevant with people, or hit your goals as to what you wanted to do with that book. So, just advice for new authors.
Yes, absolutely. I think publishers in our hearts, we would love to spend $1 million on every campaign because we love our authors and believe in them. But truth be told, our marketing budgets, I think that in all my years, and I've been in Christian publishing for 11 years, held lots of hats and positions. I think my biggest budget ever that I've had in a campaign was probably $100,000 to spend. And that's a huge,
Yeah,
huge book, huge marquee project. Most marketing budgets are more in like the probably the $5,000 to $10,000 range.
yeah, yeah,
Is definitely more realistic. But and again, the secret, as we've talked about, is just doing podcasts. And to
yeah,
today, getting out there, keep talking about it. If you are able to travel and speak or be at conferences, it's literally just being in front of people, sharing your message. That's the best thing that you can do to keep it alive. Because in reality, a publisher is going to be paying a lot of attention for about 3 to 6 months, kind of that
yeah,
3 months up to release and that 3 months after. And that's probably the amount they're going to help you saturate the market, and then they have to move on to the next thing coming out. So
yeah,
once the publisher's done, the author does have to keep moving forward. Like my last book came out a year ago, and I'm doing interviews again right now, and the book's a
yeah,
year old.
yeah,
That's how new people find out about it.
yeah,
So
yeah.
uh, important question. When does the follow-up book come out? Do you have a release timeline, or is that still up in the air?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's really hard to do it in under a year. I mean, and a lot of times, again, if people don't know, if you go through the normal process of writing it, you still could have at least a full year and maybe up to 2 years to get through the editing and the publishing and the
Right.
cover design and all those other aspects of it. So we didn't start writing book two in the sequel until the first one was published. So that's going to take a year to probably get done. And then because it's going through an in-house publishing, it's going to, get through the hoop, but it's still 6 or 9 months even further down the road from that. So in under 2 years is when it will be out. We would like it out sometime next year is the target. And you have to make sure that, particularly as how markets have changed today, is you have to give a date for release well in advance to Amazon, as you know, and you cannot afford to miss that date. Otherwise, you'll be punished. So you want to be a little bit conservative on what that published date was. So like this last one was ready to go probably 2 or 3 months before the publish date, but we didn't want to stumble out of the gates by missing it.
And in terms of audiobook, are you planning audio editions of this series?
Yes, it's available in Kindle and print version right now. Audible started work on about the 1st of May, and we went through the process of getting the readers and that in April. I'm hoping it will be out. I was hoping it would be released before about the first week of June or so, but by the end of June for sure, because it's not that long of a book. So it will be out. And once I have that out, I will redo my website as well so that there's a link on there for the purchase of the Kindle version that's right on there and the Audible version like I have for the other two books. And it's available on Amazon and Kindle today. I don't have that link on my website yet. I'll do one complete revision when I do that. And it's also available at barnesandnoble.com. I know Barnes and Noble has, put a fairly large stocking order in their stores to open it. So hoping it remains on the shelves that are out there, but online bookstores. And if you want signed copies, you go to my website. I believe we should continue to do signed copies, just as I believe we need written copies out there. Without the written sort of book, we don't have publishers. So they need that to cover their overheads. And the digital and the Audible are a spin off of that. And they don't necessarily hold the rights on that aspect of
Right.
it. So we need to have that in place. And the author's role is to make sure that you're in contact with the audience and that you're doing signed books. So I have 5 buy pages. Go to the buy now page. And buy page 1 is for book 1, buy page 2 is for book 2, buy page 3 is for the Opprimo Conspiracy. There's discounts for multiple books on each of those 3 pages. Buy page 4 is bundling for books 1 and 2 with discounts. And buy page 5 is bundling for all 3 books with discounts. On the buy pages, there is a page for the US, there's a page for Canada, and there's a page for anywhere else in the world. And I do sign copies all over the world. You can buy from me or you can buy through a retailer of any sort. I do not have a push or preference for either. I think both are important. But understand that Amazon, I don't undercut their price, and the
Right.
publishing agreement doesn't permit me to do that. So, but if you want a signed copy, that's what you do, and the orders come in, and you can customize the signing any way that you want. And I will turn those books around within 3 or 4 days of receiving the order. Shipping times can be 10 or 12 days to the U.S. I live in Canada, and all the prices are in U.S. funds. For people outside of the U.S., it's still in U.S. funds.
Well, and I think we all need a signed copy of one or multiples of Gary's books because it just makes your library cooler to have signed copies. And that is something worth pointing out too. Is
Yeah,
just buying direct from the author is a great way to support their work and their
yeah,
ministry because
absolutely.
the royalties are different depending on who sells the book. Amazon, Barnes and
Yep,
Noble, those vendors buy those at a discount from the publisher, and so
yep,
the percent that the author gets is smaller if you buy them
yep,
directly. More goes directly to the author supporting their work in
yeah.
ministry. So always something to think about. I'm excited you're getting the audiobook professionally narrated. I was hoping you weren't going to say, "Oh, we're just going to do Amazon for spiritual
No,
voice." It's like
no.
I would stumble through that and suffer through it, but a professional narration is
Yes, have to
a
do it that
much
way.
better
Yeah,
choice.
yeah. And I'll just put the Opprimo up there. And if those eyes look a little bit haunting, that character is Beck, the main character in the book, and her eyes are a fiery orange color, and that's a reflection of the flame. And we talk about the flame as sort of the Holy Spirit, and that's a reflection of that. And in the book, we have a counterfeit flame as well with the polytheist religion because they counterfeit everything.
Yes, the enemy is good at turning what God ordained and turning it
Yeah.
upside down and presenting a counterfeit version. So yes, not surprised you added the element. I just love your attention to detail, Gary, and everything you presented in the book and in our interview. And if like I'm not a huge fiction guy. I work in a very much a nonfiction world
Yep.
with my research, my writing, the books I help publish. But I love to have a book like Gary's every now and then to take me off my normal reading diet and just go down a rabbit hole of enjoying a story. I love
Yep.
that it connects into your broader world and the things you're passionate about. And so, if you haven't read the book yet, I think it's definitely worth your time. And when you finish the Opprimo Conspiracy, then go after the Genesis 6 Conspiracy 1 and 2. That'll probably take you 5 years to finish reading. But hey, read a little bit every morning and every night, and you'll get through it. Gary, in terms of people connecting with you, buy your books, all the things,
Yep.
give us your website. Where do we connect with you on the web?
Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's the number 6conspiracy.com. On that website, there's a contact the author icon. That's the best way to get a hold of me. I am on Facebook, and I am on X. And that's about all I can handle with the influx of contacts that are coming in.
And I can vouch for, like, 11 years ago, I contacted Gary through his webpage, and he got back to me and got me a book so we could do an interview. And so he does get back to people as time allows. And as he said, he's doing 4 or 5 interviews some weeks. He's busy. He's got writing projects. And so if you've reached out to Gary, be patient. You're in the queue. He'll get back to you when he can. Gary, just impressive job with this project. I love to see authors kind of jump into new genres. And so, I'm always intrigued when an author goes from nonfiction to fiction. I love that this is a, 3 to 5 book series. And I love that this is bringing people, kind of in baby sized bites into your broader Genesis 6 conspiracy world. So, well done. Gary, just always a pleasure. Thank you for sharing and pouring into us. And thank you for the work you do. You're an important contributor to the whole conversational space that you're. I feel like in some ways you own a lot of that space right now, just with everywhere I've seen you. But always a pleasure. I consider you a friend and love your work. Just thanks for being you.
Well, terrific. It's always fun to work with you. And I know you're off on a new project of business side of it. And best of wishes on that. And feel free to invite me back anytime.